Marcus Rodriguez had seen enough blood to fill a swimming pool. 12 years as a Navy SEAL medic had taught him that courage came in many forms, but nothing had prepared him for the woman sitting across from him in the dimly lit coffee shop near Camp Pendleton. Sarah Chen looked like any other civilian, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a faded UC San Diego sweatshirt. But the way she held herself, the constant scanning of exits, and the controlled way she breathed told him she was anything but ordinary. They had met 3 weeks ago at a veteran support group that Marcus reluctantly attended. His commanding officer had suggested it after Marcus froze during a routine training exercise, something that had never happened in his decorated career. The nightmares from his last deployment in Afghanistan were eating him alive, and the guilt of losing 2 teammates in an IED blast had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about himself. Sarah had been sitting in the back row, barely speaking during the sessions. When she did talk, her voice was steady and measured, offering comfort to other veterans struggling with their own demons. There was something about her presence that drew Marcus in, a quiet strength that reminded him of the calm before a storm. She never shared her own story, always deflecting attention to others who needed to talk. After several weeks of stolen glances and brief conversations over coffee after meetings, Marcus had finally worked up the courage to ask her out. To his surprise, she said yes. Their first date had been simple, a walk along the beach in La Jolla, where they talked about everything except their military service. She was a graduate student in psychology, she told him, working on her dissertation about trauma recovery. She loved hiking, old movies, and had an inexplicable fondness for terrible reality TV shows. Tonight was their 4th date, and Marcus found himself falling for this mysterious woman who seemed to understand his struggles without judgment. She listened when he talked about the weight of carrying wounded soldiers to safety, about the split-second decisions that meant life or death for his teammates. Sarah never offered empty platitudes or tried to fix him. She just listened with an intensity that made him feel truly heard for the first time in months. As they sat in the coffee shop, sharing a piece of chocolate cake and talking about their plans for the weekend, Marcus noticed the way Sarah's hand trembled slightly when a car backfired outside. She covered it quickly, but he saw the brief flash of something raw and vulnerable in her eyes before she composed herself again. It was a look he recognized from his own mirror, the haunted expression of someone who had seen too much, done too much, survived too much. Marcus reached across the table and gently touched her hand. Sarah looked up, surprised by the gesture, and for a moment her carefully constructed walls seemed to crumble. In that instant he saw past the graduate student facade to something deeper, something that spoke to the warrior in him. But before he could ask the question forming in his mind, Sarah pulled her hand away and glanced at her watch. The moment passed, and Sarah was back to being the composed woman he had come to care about deeply. They walked to her car together, the California evening air warm against their skin. As she fumbled with her keys, Marcus noticed a small tattoo on her wrist that he had never seen before, partially hidden by a bracelet she always wore. It looked military, but before he could get a better look, Sarah had covered it again. She kissed him goodnight, a soft brush of lips that left him wanting more, and drove away into the darkness. Marcus stood in the parking lot long after her taillights disappeared, wrestling with the growing certainty that the woman he was falling in love with was carrying secrets that might be bigger than his own. The way she moved, the controlled breathing, the hyper-awareness of her surroundings all pointed to combat experience. But Sarah had never mentioned serving in the military, had never even hinted at it during their time together. As Marcus drove home to his small apartment near the base, his mind raced with questions. Who was Sarah Chen, really? What was she hiding behind that calm exterior and those kind eyes? And why did he have the unsettling feeling that whatever secrets she was keeping might change everything between them? The warrior in him recognized another warrior, but the man in him was terrified of what that recognition might mean for their budding relationship. 3 days after their coffee shop date, Marcus found himself at the veteran support group again, hoping to see Sarah. Dr. Williams, the group facilitator, was discussing coping mechanisms for hypervigilance when Marcus noticed Sarah's empty chair. She had missed the last 2 meetings, and Marcus felt a growing concern that went beyond simple disappointment. He had tried calling her twice, but both times the calls went straight to voicemail. After the session ended, Marcus lingered, helping Dr. Williams stack chairs and clean up. The older psychologist had been running veteran support groups for over 20 years and had a way of reading people that made Marcus uncomfortable sometimes. As they worked in companionable silence, Dr. Williams finally spoke up. "You're worried about Sarah," he said, not making it a question. Marcus paused in his chair stacking, caught off guard by the directness of the observation. Dr. Williams continued, "She's been coming to my groups for almost 6 months now, always punctual, always helpful to others. Never talks about herself. You're the first person she's shown any real interest in connecting with." Marcus felt a mix of relief and confusion. 6 months was longer than Sarah had let on, and it raised more questions about what had brought her to the group in the first place. He found himself asking Dr. Williams if he knew anything about Sarah's background, but the older man just shook his head with a knowing smile. "Client confidentiality, son. But I will say this. Everyone who comes through these doors is fighting their own war. Some battles are just quieter than others." The words stuck with Marcus as he drove home, adding another layer to the mystery that was Sarah Chen. The next morning, Marcus was at the base gym working through his physical therapy routine when his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Sorry I missed the meeting. Can we talk? Meet me at Sunset Cliffs at 6 p.m. The message was shorter than her usual text, and something about the tone felt urgent, almost desperate. Marcus spent the rest of the day distracted, running through scenarios in his head. By the time he arrived at Sunset Cliffs, the sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He found Sarah sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean, her posture tense despite the peaceful setting. When she turned to face him, Marcus was struck by how different she looked. The careful composure was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. This was not the controlled, confident woman he had come to know over the past month. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. "I haven't been honest with you. I haven't been honest with anyone, really, but you deserve to know the truth before this goes any further." Marcus felt his stomach clench with anticipation and dread. He had sensed for weeks that Sarah was hiding something significant, but hearing her confirm it made the situation suddenly very real. He sat down beside her on the bench, close enough to offer support but giving her space to speak. Sarah took a deep breath and stared out at the ocean for a long moment before continuing. "The story I told you about being a graduate student, about studying psychology, it's true, but it's not the whole truth. I am working on my dissertation, but I started the program as part of my transition out of the military. I served 8 years in the Army as a combat medic, with 3 deployments to Afghanistan and 1 to Iraq." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. A combat medic, 4 deployments, 8 years of service. Everything about Sarah suddenly made perfect sense. The hypervigilance, the controlled breathing, the way she had understood his struggles without him having to explain them. She was not just someone who studied trauma. She was someone who had lived it, breathed it, survived it. But if Sarah was a veteran, why had she hidden it from him? Why keep her service record secret from someone who would understand better than most? Marcus felt a mix of relief and hurt, grateful to finally understand the truth, but wounded that she had felt the need to lie to him about something so fundamental. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah turned to face him fully, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I know you must be wondering why I didn't tell you. Why I let you think I was just some civilian who happened to understand what you were going through. The truth is, Marcus, I'm not just any veteran. There are things about my service, things I did over there that I've never told anyone, things that would change how you see me, how everyone sees me." Marcus reached for her hand, but Sarah pulled away gently, shaking her head. "Please, let me finish. You need to know what you're getting involved with before you decide if you still want to be here." Her voice was getting stronger now, as if the act of finally speaking the truth was giving her back some of her power. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the cliffs as Sarah prepared to reveal the secret she had been carrying alone for so long. Marcus braced himself for whatever was coming, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the future of their relationship and force him to confront truths about himself he might not be ready to face. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand and stared at the darkening ocean before beginning to speak again. Her voice was steady now, but Marcus could hear the years of pain and guilt underneath each word. The setting sun cast her profile in sharp relief, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked every bit the battle-hardened veteran she was revealing herself to be. My first deployment was in 2015, to a forward operating base in Helmand Province, she began. I was 23 years old, fresh out of combat medic training, and I thought I knew what I was signing up for. I had studied battlefield medicine, practiced on training dummies, memorized every possible trauma scenario. But nothing prepares you for the real thing, for holding someone's life in your hands while mortars are falling around you. Marcus listened intently, recognizing the haunted quality in her voice that came from reliving memories that never fully went away. He had heard that same tone in his own voice when he talked about his worst days downrange. During my second month there, our convoy hit an IED while on a routine patrol. The blast flipped our lead vehicle and trapped 3 soldiers inside. The enemy opened fire while we were trying to extract the wounded, and I found myself running through gunfire to reach them. One soldier had a sucking chest wound. Another had lost most of his left leg, and the third was unconscious with a head injury that was bleeding badly. Sarah paused, her breathing becoming more controlled as she worked through the anxiety that talking about the incident triggered. Marcus wanted to reach out to her, to offer some kind of comfort, but he sensed that she needed to get through this without interruption. I managed to stabilize all 3 men and get them to the medical evacuation helicopter. They all survived, and my commanding officer recommended me for a Bronze Star with V device for valor. I was 23 years old, and suddenly I was being called a hero for doing what I had been trained to do. But that day changed something in me, made me realize I was good at staying calm when everyone else was falling apart. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and Marcus felt a surge of respect for this woman who had run toward danger to save lives, but he could also hear something else underneath the pride, a darkness that suggested the story was far from over. My second deployment was different. I was assigned to a special operations unit that worked closely with local Afghan forces. We were tasked with training Afghan medics and providing medical support for joint operations. It was supposed to be a safer assignment, more focused on building relationships and training than direct combat. But Afghanistan had other plans. Sarah's hands were trembling again, and this time she did not try to hide it. Marcus could see her struggling with whatever was coming next, and he braced himself for the revelation that had been building throughout her story. There was an Afghan interpreter named Ahmad who worked with our unit. He was maybe 19 years old, spoke perfect English, and had dreams of coming to America to study medicine. He reminded me of my younger brother back home, always asking questions about medical procedures and watching everything I did with this intense curiosity. Ahmad saved our lives more than once, warning us about suspicious activity in villages we were visiting and helping us navigate the complex tribal politics of the region. The wind was picking up off the ocean, and Sarah pulled her jacket tighter around herself before continuing. Marcus noticed that her breathing was becoming more rapid, and he recognized the signs of someone approaching a traumatic memory that their mind was trying to protect them from reliving. 6 months into the deployment, we received intelligence that there was a Taliban cell operating out of a compound about 10 kilometers from our base. The mission was supposed to be simple: go in, gather intelligence, apprehend or eliminate any high-value targets, and get out. Ahmad was supposed to stay back at the base, but at the last minute our commanding officer decided we needed his language skills and local knowledge. Sarah stopped talking completely now, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Marcus could see her fighting against the panic attack that was threatening to overwhelm her. Without thinking, he moved closer on the bench and began the breathing exercise that Dr. Williams had taught their support group. Sarah looked at him gratefully and began to match his rhythm, slowly bringing her anxiety back under control. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I haven't talked about this with anyone. Ever. Not even the Army psychologist during my debriefing." Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah nodded and took several more deep breaths before continuing. The compound was supposed to be lightly defended, but it was a trap. As soon as we breached the main building, we came under heavy fire from multiple positions. Ahmad was right behind me when the shooting started, and I saw him take a round to the chest. I dragged him behind cover and started working on his wound, but it was bad. Really bad. The last rays of sunlight were disappearing behind the horizon now, and the cliffs were bathed in the blue twilight that preceded full darkness. Sarah's voice had dropped to almost a whisper, and Marcus had to lean in close to hear her over the sound of the waves below. That's when everything went wrong, Marcus. That's when I made the decision that's been haunting me for 5 years. The darkness had settled completely over Sunset Cliffs now, with only the distant lights of San Diego providing any illumination. Sarah's voice cut through the night air like a knife, sharp and precise despite the emotional weight of what she was revealing. Ahmad was dying in my arms, but he was conscious enough to tell me something that changed everything. With his last breaths, he whispered that the Taliban commander we were looking for was his older brother. Ahmad had been feeding information to the enemy for months, giving them our patrol routes, our safe houses, the names of Afghan civilians who were helping us. 3 American soldiers had died in attacks that Ahmad's intelligence had made possible. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The betrayal that Sarah was describing was every soldier's worst nightmare, the fear that haunted everyone who worked with local interpreters and guides. The people you trusted with your life, the ones who shared your meals and learned your language, could be the same ones planning your death. I should have called for backup, should have secured Ahmad and gotten him back to base for interrogation. That was protocol, and that's what I had been trained to do, but I was 25 years old. I had just lost 3 brothers because of this kid I had trusted, and I was holding him while he bled out from a wound I could probably save him from. And in that moment, watching him struggle to breathe, I made a choice that goes against everything I swore to uphold as a medic. Sarah's hands were shaking violently now, and Marcus could see tears streaming down her face even in the darkness. The magnitude of what she was about to confess was written in every line of her body, in the way she held herself as if preparing for a physical blow. I stopped treating his wound. I had the training and the supplies to save Ahmad's life, but I made the conscious decision to let him die. I sat there and watched the light go out of his eyes while gunfire raged around us, and I told myself it was justice for the soldiers who had died because of his betrayal. But the truth is, Marcus, it was revenge, pure and simple revenge. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt his own breathing become shallow as he processed what Sarah had just told him. She had violated the most sacred principle of military medicine, the oath to treat all wounded regardless of who they were or what they had done. She had let someone die who she could have saved, and she had carried that secret for 5 years. Marcus understood now why Sarah had been so reluctant to talk about her military service, why she had hidden her veteran status even from other veterans. The guilt and shame of that moment had been eating her alive, isolating her from the very community that might have understood and supported her through her trauma. After Ahmad died, the firefight continued for another 2 hours before we were able to extract. I filed my report stating that Ahmad had sustained fatal injuries that were beyond my ability to treat in the field. No one questioned it, no one investigated. The official record shows that Ahmad died a hero, killed while helping American forces in combat against the Taliban. Sarah turned to look at Marcus directly for the first time since she had started her confession. Her face was a mask of pain and exhaustion, but there was also something that looked like relief, as if the act of finally speaking her truth was lifting a weight she had been carrying alone for too long. I received another Bronze Star for my actions that day, for treating the wounded under fire, and for attempting to save Ahmad's life. They gave me a medal for something I didn't do, for showing mercy I didn't have. I've never been able to look at those medals without remembering that I let someone die when I had the power to save them. Marcus was struggling to find words, to process the complexity of what Sarah had shared with him. Part of him understood her actions, could imagine the rage and betrayal she must have felt in that moment. Another part of him was horrified by the violation of medical ethics, by the cold calculation it must have taken to watch someone die when you had the power to prevent it. I finished my deployment and requested a transfer to a non-combat role. I spent my last 2 years in the Army working at a medical facility in Germany, treating soldiers who were being evacuated from downrange. Every day I saw wounded men and women who had been saved by medics who had honored their oath, who had put their duty above their personal feelings. And every day I remembered that I had failed that test when it mattered most. The sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed Sarah's confession. Marcus could feel her waiting for his response, for some indication of whether he could accept what she had told him, or if this revelation would end whatever was building between them. Marcus thought about his own moments of moral complexity downrange, The split-second decisions that had haunted him, the times when the line between right and wrong had been blurred by adrenaline, fear, and the brutal calculus of survival. But what Sarah had described was different, more deliberate, more final. She had crossed a line that he had never been tested against, and he honestly was not sure how he would have reacted in her position. "Sarah," he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you regret what you did? If you could go back and make a different choice, would you save Ahmad's life?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark ocean as she considered his question. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible above the sound of the waves. "I don't know, Marcus, and that terrifies me more than anything else." The drive back to Marcus's apartment was conducted in complete silence. Sarah had offered to go home alone, but Marcus insisted on following her to make sure she arrived safely. His mind was reeling from everything she had revealed, and he found himself questioning not just his feelings for her, but his own moral compass and what he thought he knew about the nature of right and wrong in combat. Back in his small apartment, Marcus sat on his couch staring at the Bronze Star citation hanging on his wall. He had earned it for treating wounded Marines under fire during a Taliban ambush, working for 6 hours straight to keep injured men alive until medical evacuation could arrive. The citation praised his dedication to preserving life regardless of personal risk. Reading it now, after hearing Sarah's story, the words felt both more meaningful and more complicated than they ever had before. Marcus pulled out his laptop and found himself researching military medical ethics, reading case studies of combat medics who had faced impossible moral choices in the field. He learned about the concept of triage, about how medics were trained to make life-and-death decisions based on who could be saved and who could not. But what Sarah had described was not triage. It was a conscious choice to let someone die who could have been saved. Over the next 3 days, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. He went through the motions of his physical therapy appointments and his duties on base, but his mind kept returning to that moment on the cliffs when Sarah had looked at him with such vulnerability and terror. She had trusted him with her darkest secret, and now he was struggling with what to do with that trust. On Thursday evening, Marcus called his older brother David, who had served as a Marine chaplain during the Iraq War. David had seen his share of moral complexity in combat and had counseled hundreds of Marines struggling with the ethical dimensions of warfare. If anyone could help Marcus process what he was feeling, it would be his brother. "Marcus, I can hear in your voice that this is eating you up," David said after listening to a carefully edited version of the situation. "But you need to ask yourself what you're really struggling with here. Are you questioning this person's actions? Or are you questioning your own capacity for understanding and forgiveness?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, because it forced him to confront something he had been avoiding. Part of his discomfort with Sarah's confession was not moral outrage but fear. Fear that he might have made the same choice in her position. Fear that the line between hero and villain was thinner than he wanted to believe. Friday morning brought an unexpected text from Sarah. "I understand if you need space to process what I told you. I'm flying to Denver this weekend to visit my parents. When I get back on Monday, we can talk about where we go from here. Thank you for listening without judgment, even if you decide you can't move forward with this." The message made Marcus realize that Sarah was preparing for him to walk away, expecting rejection and abandonment, just as she had experienced with everyone else she might have considered telling her story to. The thought of her sitting alone on that plane, convinced that she had destroyed the one relationship that had brought her any peace, was more than Marcus could bear. He found himself driving to the airport without fully deciding to do so. San Diego International was busy with weekend travelers, and Marcus had to park in the remote lot and take a shuttle to the terminal. He did not even know what airline Sarah was flying or what time her flight departed, but he felt compelled to try to find her. After checking the departure boards for flights to Denver, Marcus began walking through the terminal, scanning the gate areas for any sign of Sarah's familiar figure. He found her at gate 24, sitting alone near the window with her carry-on bag at her feet. She was staring out at the planes on the tarmac, and even from a distance Marcus could see the exhaustion and resignation in her posture. When Sarah saw him walking toward her, her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, hope, fear, and something that might have been relief. Marcus sat down in the empty chair beside her without saying anything. and for several minutes they both watched the ground crews loading luggage and preparing aircraft for departure. "You came," Sarah said finally, her voice filled with wonder as if she could not quite believe he was there. "I came," Marcus confirmed. "Sarah, I've spent the last 3 days thinking about what you told me, and I need you to know something. What you did in Afghanistan does not define who you are. It was one moment, one decision made under impossible circumstances by someone who was dealing with trauma and betrayal, and the kind of pressure that most people will never understand." Sarah turned to look at him, tears already forming in her eyes. "Marcus, I let someone die. I took an oath to preserve life, and I deliberately chose to let someone die. How can you sit there and tell me that doesn't define who I am?" Marcus reached for her hands, and this time she did not pull away. "Because I've seen who you are for the past month. I've watched you listen to other veterans with compassion and understanding, helping them work through their own guilt and trauma. I've seen you dedicate your life to studying how to help people heal from the very kind of experiences that broke you. Sarah, you've spent the last 5 years trying to atone for one moment of human weakness." The boarding announcement for Sarah's flight crackled over the intercom, but neither of them moved. Marcus could see Sarah struggling with his words, wanting to believe them but afraid to hope that forgiveness and acceptance were possible. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened or to pretend it doesn't matter," Marcus continued. "I'm asking you to consider that maybe the person you became because of that experience is someone worth loving. Maybe the guilt and regret you've carried has made you more compassionate, more understanding of human frailty, more committed to helping others heal." Sarah was crying openly now, years of isolation and self-hatred finally finding release. "I've been so afraid, Marcus. Afraid that if anyone knew the truth about what I did, they would see me as a monster. I've been hiding from everyone, including myself, because I couldn't face the possibility of being rejected again." Marcus pulled her into his arms as the final boarding call echoed through the gate area. "You're not a monster, Sarah. You're a human being who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you find a way to forgive yourself for being human." Sarah missed her flight to Denver that Friday, choosing instead to drive with Marcus along the Pacific Coast Highway, as they talked through the complexity of what they were both feeling. The conversation was raw and honest in a way that neither of them had experienced before, touching on guilt, forgiveness, moral injury, and the possibility of healing from wounds that went deeper than anything physical. They stopped at a small seafood restaurant in Carmel, where Sarah called her parents to explain that she would be visiting them another time. Marcus watched her struggle to find words that would not worry them, while also not revealing the emotional breakthrough she was experiencing. Her parents had never known about her military service beyond the basic facts, and certainly had no idea about the burden she had been carrying alone. Over dinner, Sarah began to open up about the years following her discharge from the Army, the isolation, the inability to connect with other veterans, the way she had thrown herself into her psychology studies as both penance and preparation for a life dedicated to helping others heal from trauma. She had chosen her dissertation topic specifically because she wanted to understand how people recovered from moral injury, the psychological wound that came from perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that violated fundamental moral beliefs. "I've been studying moral injury for 3 years now," Sarah explained as they shared a piece of key lime pie. "I've read every research paper, interviewed dozens of veterans who struggle with similar experiences, and I've learned all the theoretical frameworks for recovery, but I never applied any of it to myself because I was convinced that what I did was unforgivable." Marcus listened as she described the phenomenon that therapists and researchers were only beginning to understand. Unlike post-traumatic stress disorder, which stemmed from experiencing or witnessing traumatic events, moral injury came from actions that violated a person's deeply held beliefs about right and wrong. The treatment approaches were different, focusing less on managing symptoms and more on helping people reconstruct meaning and find ways to live with the gap between their values and their actions. The irony is that I probably understand moral injury better than most therapists, Sarah continued. I just never believed that understanding could help me heal from my own wounds. I was so convinced that I was beyond forgiveness that I never even tried to apply the techniques I was learning to help others. As they drove back toward San Diego the next morning, Marcus found himself sharing his own struggles with moral complexity from his time as a SEAL medic. He told Sarah about the times he had been forced to make triage decisions, choosing which wounded soldiers to treat first when medical supplies were limited. He talked about the guilt he felt over the teammates he had been unable to save, and the way that guilt had manifested in his recent freezing episode during training. "I've been so focused on the lives I couldn't save that I forgot about all the lives I did save," Marcus admitted as they pulled into a rest stop overlooking the ocean. "Maybe that's what you need to remember too. Ahmad was not the only person whose life was in your hands during your deployments. How many soldiers did you save? How many people are alive today because of your skill and dedication?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out at the waves as she considered his words. "I never kept count," she said finally. "I was too focused on the one life I chose not to save to think about all the others." That afternoon, they attended the veteran support group together for the first time as a couple who knew each other's full stories. Dr. Williams noticed the change in their dynamic immediately, the way they sat closer together and the more relaxed expression on Sarah's face. When the group discussion turned to moral injury and the struggle to forgive oneself for wartime actions, Sarah spoke up for the first time in months. "I've been coming to this group for almost 7 months now," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "I've listened to all of you share your stories and your struggles, and I've offered support where I could. But I've never talked about my own experiences because I was convinced that what I did was unforgivable. This week I learned something important about the nature of forgiveness and the possibility of healing from moral wounds." The group listened intently as Sarah shared an edited version of her story, focusing on the concepts of moral injury and the importance of seeking connection rather than isolation when dealing with complex guilt. She did not reveal the specific details of Ahmad's death, but she talked about the challenge of living with actions that violated her core beliefs and the way that shame had kept her from seeking the help she needed. Marcus watched with admiration as Sarah transformed her pain into something that could help others. Several group members approached her after the session to thank her for her honesty and to share their own struggles with moral complexity. For the first time since he had known her, Sarah seemed to be fully present and engaged rather than holding herself apart from the community that surrounded her. After the group session, Dr. Williams asked to speak with both of them privately. In his small office, surrounded by books on trauma and recovery, the older psychologist looked at them with the kind of knowing smile that came from years of watching people find their way through difficult healing processes. "I want you both to know that what I witnessed today was remarkable," he said. "Sarah, the courage it took to share your experience with the group was extraordinary. And Marcus, the way you supported her while also addressing your own healing needs shows a level of emotional maturity that will serve you both well as you move forward together." Dr. Williams paused, choosing his words carefully. Moral injury is one of the most challenging aspects of military trauma to address, because it strikes at the core of who we believe ourselves to be. But I've learned over the years that healing is possible when people are willing to move from isolation toward connection, from shame toward understanding, and from self-condemnation toward self-compassion. As they left Dr. Williams' office that evening, Marcus felt something shift between them. The secrets were gone, the walls had come down, and they were facing the future together with a clearer understanding of both their wounds and their capacity for healing. The road ahead would not be easy, but they would travel it together. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the audience of the UC San Diego Psychology Department auditorium, watching Sarah defend her doctoral dissertation on moral injury and recovery among combat veterans. The research she presented was groundbreaking, combining academic rigor with personal insight in a way that impressed even the most skeptical members of her committee. But Marcus was most proud of the courage it had taken for Sarah to include a carefully anonymized case study of her own experience. As part of her research, the transformation in Sarah over the past months had been remarkable to witness. She had begun working with Dr. Williams in individual therapy, finally applying the techniques she had studied for years to her own healing process. The guilt and shame that had isolated her for so long were gradually being replaced by a deeper understanding of moral complexity and the possibility of redemption through service to others. Sarah had also made the difficult decision to contact the families of the 3 soldiers who had died as a result of Ahmad's intelligence leaks. She did not tell them about Ahmad's betrayal or her own actions, but she reached out to express her condolences and to share memories of their loved ones that honored their service and sacrifice. The conversations were painful but healing, connecting her to the human cost of war in a way that felt redemptive rather than destructive. Marcus had undergone his own transformation during this period. Working through his feelings about Sarah's confession had forced him to confront his own moral assumptions and the black and white, thinking that had made it difficult for him to process the gray areas of combat. He had returned to active duty with a deeper understanding of the psychological challenges faced by combat medics and had begun advocating for better mental health resources for special operations personnel. The freezing episodes that had plagued Marcus during training had gradually disappeared as he worked through his own trauma with Dr. Williams and learned to forgive himself for the teammates he had been unable to save. He and Sarah had become partners in healing, supporting each other through the difficult work of reconstructing meaning and purpose after moral injury. Their relationship had deepened into something neither of them had expected to find. The foundation of complete honesty they had built during those first difficult weeks had created a level of intimacy and trust that went far beyond anything either had experienced before. They understood each other's wounds and triggers, celebrated each other's progress, and provided support during setbacks without judgment or impatience. After Sarah's successful dissertation defense, the celebration dinner included not just her academic colleagues but also several members of their veteran support group who had become like family over the months. Dr. Williams raised a toast to Sarah's achievement, but also to the courage it took to transform personal pain into something that could help others heal. Sarah's research will change how we understand and treat moral injury in combat veterans, Dr. Williams said, raising his glass. But more importantly, her willingness to be vulnerable about her own experiences will inspire others to seek the help they need, rather than suffering in isolation. Later that evening, as they walked along the beach where they had first talked about their military service, Marcus and Sarah reflected on how far they had both come since that night at Sunset Cliffs, when she had trusted him with her darkest secret. "I never thought I would be able to forgive myself for what I did," Sarah said, stopping to watch the waves roll in under the moonlight. "I certainly never imagined that I could build a relationship with someone who knew the truth about me, and still chose to stay." Marcus took her hand, no longer surprised by how natural the gesture felt after months of learning to be completely open with each other. "I think that's what real love is," he said. "Not loving someone despite their flaws and mistakes, but loving them because of how those experiences shaped them into someone capable of deep compassion and understanding." Sarah had accepted a position as a trauma therapist at the VA hospital in San Diego, where she would specialize in treating veterans struggling with moral injury. Her personal experience, combined with her academic expertise, made her uniquely qualified to help others navigate the complex process of healing from actions that violated their core values. Marcus had been selected for a new assignment training, Navy SEAL Medics in Advanced Trauma Care, a role that would allow him to use his combat experience to better prepare the next generation of special operations medical personnel. He had also begun speaking at military medical conferences about the psychological challenges faced by combat medics and the importance of addressing moral injury and treatment protocols. As they continued their walk along the shore, Sarah pulled out a small velvet box that Marcus had given her earlier that evening, after her dissertation defense. Inside was a simple engagement ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a woman who had waited through World War II for the man she loved to return from the Pacific Theater. "She would have liked you," Marcus said, as Sarah examined the ring in the moonlight. "Grandma always said that the strongest relationships were built between people who had survived their own battles and learned how to help each other heal." Sarah slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how it seemed to fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Are you sure you want to marry someone with my history?" she asked, the old insecurity still surfacing occasionally despite months of healing. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. "Sarah, I want to marry the woman who saved countless lives under fire, who had the courage to seek help when she needed it, who turned her pain into purpose by dedicating her life to helping others heal. I want to marry the woman who trusted me with her truth and helped me find my own path to forgiveness." As they embraced on the moonlit beach, both of them understood that their love story had been forged in the crucible of shared trauma and mutual healing. They had found each other not despite their wounds, but because those wounds had taught them the value of compassion, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. The wedding would take place the following spring in a small ceremony attended by their families, their veteran support group, and the military colleagues who had become their chosen family. Dr. Williams would officiate, having watched their relationship grow from its foundations of pain and secrecy into something beautiful and redemptive. But for now, they walked hand in hand along the Pacific shore, two wounded warriors who had found in each other the possibility of healing, forgiveness, and a love strong enough to bear the weight of difficult truths. They had learned that the deepest connections were not built on perfection, but on the courage to be known completely by another person, and to be loved not in spite of their struggles, but because of the strength and compassion those struggles had created within them. The sound of waves continued to wash against the shore as they made their way back to the car, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives together, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the honesty, courage, and commitment to healing that had brought them together in the first place.